Hi, my name is Michael Kress, and welcome to Heroic Lives. Today we're going to be looking at St. Ignatius of Loyola, how I met the saint, how he became my confirmation saint some years ago when I came into the church, and more, so stay tuned. For me to talk about St. Ignatius of Loyola, I first have to go back to when I entered the church in March 2013. As an adult convert to the faith, didn't even know there was a confirmation saint or a saint that you should look for a particular devotion to. Well, obviously all Catholics are called to a devotion to Mary and Joseph. Other saints come into our lives, as I've covered on this channel. St. Ignatius of Loyola is also one of them. And as I was entering the church and starting to research about it and read about it, in the last days of Pope Benedict, and right as Pope Francis became Pope, that's when I entered the church, March 2013. At first, I thought of Thomas More because I've always liked English history, but St. Ignatius of Loyola kept coming back. So let's talk a little bit about where he came from, his life, and then how I stumbled onto him and what I find interesting about him. Ignatius of Loyola was born in 1491 in Spain, in northern Spain, in Basque country. Ignatius of Loyola, like many of us, had worldly ambitions, and his worldly ambitions were to become a knight, a soldier, and a lord, and powerful, and really with the normal things we want: fame, wealth, power, and the things that tempt us, the worldly things. He was the 13th child of 13, and his mother died not long after he was born. And he really was raised in a time when the world was changing. There was the old medieval ways being replaced by the newer ways, and not always for the better. And Ignatius of Loyola was trying to fit in there. However, even though he had some success as a soldier, starting in 1509 doing that, and avoided being wounded for much of his career, in 1521 at the Battle of Pamplona, his leg was shattered by a ricocheting cannonball. And all of the worldly things that he thought he was going to attain and would give him pleasure, success, and really peace didn't do that. And the time spent convalescing in bed at home in Loyola, Spain, and the books he read that were given to him about the saints and the life of Jesus really started to change his perspective. Ignatius Loyola speaks to me for a few reasons, and one of them is this time convalescing. God took him out of his normal life so that he could reflect on what was really important. Without that time and without being pulled away, he might never have had that spiritual reawakening. That also happened to me in my life. And when I went to Europe for the first time, and also found myself having suddenly a lot of free time to read. And as I was studying and often spending long amounts of hours in Germany reading books in the streetcars and trains, that was a chance for me to reflect that I would not have had I never gone to Europe and spent time there. Ignatius of Loyola had it forced upon him through a military wound. Thankfully, that didn't happen in my case, but it spoke to me that this reading opened his eyes to exploration into the faith. And though it would take some years longer for me than for him, I do relate to that. Ignatius of Loyola then wanted a radical conversion to be expressed in his life, and that meant giving up the worldly things. It meant hanging up his sword at the shrine of the Madonna. It meant giving away all of his worldly possessions and really begging and living a very rigorous life spiritually and aesthetically, spending up to 7 hours of prayer in a cave. One of the things that he was really haunted by was scruples. He never felt that he had quite confessed everything. And again, that's something I can relate to as well. Scruples is something, particularly when you're coming into the faith and you're learning about the forgiveness in the confessional. It's so easy to think that you forgot something, or that God's mercy isn't enough. St. Ignatius of Loyola ended up doing several general confessions. And a general confession is when you confess not just the things since your last confession, but your entire life again. And this is a good practice to do. I'd recommend trying it if you've never done it, taking a moment to really reflect and do that general confession. and it's also been recommended by other saints such as St. Francis de Sales. St. Ignatius of Loyola had the problem, though, that making the general confession wasn't enough, and he had to do it again, and wanted to even do it a third time. And though it can be done, if it comes to the point of scrupulosity, you realize that it may not be for holiness that you are wanting to do the general confession. Eventually, St. Ignatius of Loyola was freed from some of these scruples, and he really wanted to study. He first went to the Holy Land, went on a pilgrimage, and I think that's something that's worthwhile for all of us to do as a pilgrimage. And he also had these ideas that he had developed while alone in the cave and during his other travels, called the spiritual exercises. And these would come together throughout the course of his life in his subsequent priestly studies. And these are the second thing that spoke to me. The spiritual exercises focus on something that I think is underused sometimes in the spiritual world, which is your imagination, putting yourself in the scene of the event. For instance, when you say the rosary, putting yourself in the scene so that, for instance, you hold the hand of Jesus at the agony of the garden, or you walk with him as he carries his cross. This emphasis on putting yourself there, making it a personal connection, really spoke to me. And so when it came time to choose my saint, though I like many saints, St. Ignatius of Loyola really spoke to me about pulling away from life, retreating from life, and using that time to reflect, to grow closer to God. And sometimes we just have to step away. And right now, while all of us are dealing with a pandemic and having to step away from any of the things in life, maybe this is a time to reflect on the things of God and the spiritual world, and read that extra book or start those extra prayers and look for God. Maybe it's a moment of pause. St. Ignatius of Loyola went on to found the Jesuits, and the Jesuit order would be instrumental, for instance, in North America, where I am, in missionary work. It has done a lot of good in the world and has had a very interesting history. And I think Jesuits who are of that stripe really speak to what Ignatius of Loyola was hoping to create. A man of the missions, a man who saw the value of retreats and spiritual growth. And though St. Ignatius of Loyola had some ups and downs, he went before the Inquisition once and was fully acquitted, his works live on, and the Jesuit order lives on. The spiritual works of St. Ignatius of Loyola are the foundation of most modern retreats. And so now when I became into the church and I selected him, we got to say my name, Michael Ignatius of Loyola Kress, and that was a great honor. Furthermore, in 2016, when I got to go to Rome, he was buried there, and at the time it had a different name, but it's now the Church of the Gesù. It is a headquarter church for the Jesuits, and if you're ever in Rome, it's really in the heart of Rome, not far from much of the things you'd like to see. Stop by and see the tomb, and I'll put pictures up for you to see of St. Ignatius of Loyola. Sometimes a pilgrimage has those extra bonuses, whereas I had gone to Rome for the 4 basilicas, thrown in there as a confirmation of my confirmation saint's name was St. Ignatius of Loyola. St. Ignatius of Loyola led a heroic life. He sought God and was willing to leave the worldly things behind and throw his entire life into it. And he also, by listening to God, was able to overcome scruples and to give us the spiritual exercises. St. Ignatius of Loyola, pray for us. Hit the subscribe button below, or the little bell if you'd like to get notifications, and that will encourage me to keep making these videos, and I hope that they are useful to you. Have a great day.